expeditiously as we can.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put them up on the screen. So, looks like the top part is just regular old legalese, right?
Yep, so Cliff and I were able to take the draft we worked on at the last meeting.
Excuse me, just a second, Nathan. You guys okay?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Take the draft that we talked to you about at the last meeting, that additional discussion, concerns, comments, etc., and develop this draft. So this is the second draft. Like I said, the township attorney has had a chance to look at this. So there are some of his comments in there as well as our additions. We expanded, just to sort of start to give an overview, we expanded the definitions section, which is pretty standard as far as when we're writing solar ordinances. There are aspects of standards in solar ordinances that your definitions wouldn't normally cover, so we added some of those. For small-scale solar operations, things that you might have accessory to in your backyard or maybe on the roof of a business, we expanded that section to clarify sort of the differences between a large and a small scale. And then we went through and addressed your utility scale standards per our conversations and the concerns that you've been discussing over the past several months. So to start off with, any questions for me before I get started? We'll go through this page by page. I'll try to summarize. We can focus on certain sections if you have questions or want to focus on something more than others, but I'll try to do this as efficiently as we can.
Okay, and the blue is what's being added, so like right at the very get-go, for solar energy systems.
Yep, so the blue are Cliff's comments and additions. You'll see the track changes there. In order to differentiate, we had a draft so that our additions are highlighted. That way it was sort of, we tried to be clear when you start getting to multiple rounds of edits with multiple people working on it at the same time. Tracking that becomes a little bit more difficult, so this is sort of the system that we came up with.
Okay.
So you'll see that at least on page 1 and page 2, primarily those are your definitions, additions. The ordinance language at Article 1, that's sort of just the, as you call it, legalese. But these definitions address building mounted, try to differentiate between building mounted and ground mounted, maximum tilt, non-participating versus participating parcels, what prime ag soils or areas are in the township, the difference between a small scale solar energy system, what a solar energy collector surface is, measuring total area, lot coverage, land area, occupancy, etc. And then as well as what a utility scale solar energy system is. We did provide a couple of diagrams to sort of give a better sense to as how area and lot size be calculated. You'll notice that these look similarly to the Mason County example that we provided. It just helps with whoever's doing the review or whoever the applicant might be, to help communicate what it is that you're looking for. Should there be an application. So, any questions on these? These are pretty standard definitions. Like I said, Cliff had a chance to look at these. So you'll see a couple of his comments and additions in there. But.
I'm sorry, did you say what the yellow highlighted areas were?
The yellow highlight is what we added, and you'll see the track changes is what the township attorney, those are his comments or additions.
Good.
So there's a team effort in this round of drafting as we narrow in here.
Okay, planning commissioners, anything for page 1? Any questions for Nathan about page 2?
I have a question on page 2, under prime agricultural soils, section 5 there. Did you just leave that blank there for a reason?
Oh, that's on 3.
Yep, on page 3, so that is there because we're trying to make sure we place the correct reference to the state of Michigan map.
Okay.
Yep, so that'll be filled in, but as of the draft coming out to you, we just didn't have a proper name for it yet. Yep, so that'll be
Thank you.
filled in.
Is that the map that you had before?
So that was one that we created with U.S. Department of Ag. There's another map out there that we're trying to locate that the state has used. So that's something that our team and the Davis team are working on still.
Okay, do you have any idea when, that would be incremental to the adoption of this, right?
Yeah, so that would be something that would be included should you hold a public hearing. We would solve that before that
Okay.
happens. Yeah, it's for the purposes of the definition, so we didn't want to throw in the incorrect reference. And so that's a placeholder for now,
Okay.
while we figure that out. So, yep.
Any other questions for page 2? Any other questions for page 3? So the bottom of page 3, under total area,
Yeah.
that is giving a much more detailed description of what's counted as
Yes.
the system. Okay.
Yep. Because of the way, you all probably all know lot coverage for buildings and things like that. Solar panels are different in that, because the panel has a horizontal surface, but there isn't necessarily a horizontal surface all the way to the ground. So some zoning administrators or whoever might be doing a review don't quite know how to take that and calculate it. So typically when we do these, we try to specify what that means and how that's calculated, specifically to solar panels, because they are so different than a building.
And then page 4, we have the example
Yep.
of a contiguous area. I said contiguous, I said continuous.
Yep, so we did these 2 drawings to show that, if you had different portions of a lot that had panels on them, that you wouldn't count the area in between, and that you're also counting the area surrounding the parcels, the panels themselves, to help sort of clarify that definition and clarify some of the standards later in the ordinance. So they all reference back to this definition.
So in both of your illustrations, the right-of-way access drive, non-solar building, property lines are the same.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, correct. Yeah, we did that to show that, you're not counting, if you have a dwelling on the property, non-solar buildings, you're not counting the access drive, you're just counting the equipment and fencing.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. Pages 4 and 5, pages 6. We have a lot going on page 6.
Yeah. So, the way your existing ordinance was set up, it did clarify, but not necessarily maybe as clearly as we've sort of been developing in more recent ordinances. The delineation between ground-mounted, building-mounted. Building-mounted is typically not a special use. Ground-mounted, you put limitations on size, and you clarify, at what point does a small-scale solar energy system become a utility-scale solar energy system. So, it enables people to put them on their roofs with limitations, in their yards with limitations, building businesses if they want to do that same thing, etc. Puts limitations on that. What we did is we took a lot of what was in your existing ordinance and moved it. So you'll see the highlights here. Some of that language has just been moved from further down. And again, we had this clarified a little bit better prior to working with the township attorney, but because of the additional comments, this all just ended up being highlighted to show that we moved it. So you're outlining that a permit is required, applications, setbacks, locations, all of that is the same, maybe with a little bit of tweaks, noise, glare, Power lines, all of that is the same. We specified, a little bit, more clearly how to identify noise or where to measure it from. But other than that, a lot of those standards are the exact same. They're just moved into a section that covers both small scale ground mounted and small scale building mounted. And then also the applicability to at least, we're not talking about people's little solar pathway lights or things like that, to make sure that it's very clear that those are not, those are not regulated by this ordinance. So, yep. Flagpole lights, things like that, that, might have a solar panel on.
And page 8, into
Yep, so you have your building mounted for small scale systems on page 7. We kept the maximum height the same. We did add a little bit about obstruction and placement, just to make sure that, it's clear that and this wouldn't be an issue in this township necessarily, but some will place panels that are maybe protruding that in a smaller lot, city type of situation, you can block, so it's just additional language. Ground mounted, we kept the same limitations. So you have your up to 1,000 square feet in area, your sort of 1,000 to 2,000 square feet with special land use approval in certain districts. And then of course above 2,000 square feet, you move into that utility scale solar. So all that's the same. We just delineated it into a ground mounted versus building mounted. Yeah, lot coverage and everything else is the same as well. And you'll see some of the reference in there where it says moved above. That was an unfortunate, collaboration.
what was that?
Where we had
two.
moved above, we had a bunch of these labels, we had moved them above, but because of this system, we devised to try to show the different levels of edits between our two teams. We had to sort of just cross those off. We did add some section references to 1606, just to make sure that, it was clear that that's applicable to those sections, should they become larger than 2,000.
Oops, where are we? Are we on
Page 8.
still?
Yep,
Okay.
page 8 still.
Oh, okay, regulation requirements. Nope.
So all of that is work that was really just to sort of better delineate between the two types of systems and unit sizes. So, again, very little change to the actual regulation there.
And section 16 is the special land use.
Yep, utility
Chapter
scale.
of
Correct.
the ordinance.
Yep. So this reads a lot like delineating between the different systems, like the MSU example, and like a lot of other townships have recently been doing, just to make sure that there's clear guidance between the two. Any questions on that?
I was just, it says determine total area, definition of total area and others in chapter 2 of this ordinance. I'm sorry, I didn't take time to write chapter 2. So it's reading.
Chapter 2 is your definitions chapter.
So it's just from lot line to this lot line.
Yeah, so it references back to that definition with the diagrams that we were talking about.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Any questions on that? Okay.
Okay, so page 9, MM.
Page 9, so this is where we're talking utility scale, it better identifies sort of the purpose and size of a system that would go before you as a special land use. So we added a purpose statement. This just tries to better explain, that the township understands the need for energy generation, but also is sensitive to concerns and impacts regarding land use concerns in the township, and trying to strike a balance between the two. We like to add that just to make sure that it's clear what it is, the reason why the regulation exists.
Nice to put that.
Beyond that, we try to organize this section a little bit more clearly. So you'll see where we added headlines to each section. So above you have purpose, and you'll see it special land use. So it describes, and again, some of this right here, this section are sections the township attorney added. But this talks about, what is a special land use and why. And then also he added some additional standards in here that are specific to special uses, talking about impacts to property values, visually, aesthetically, economically, or otherwise, impacts, harmonious, consistent with the intent of the township zoning ordinance. Talking about precedent setting for large impacts or adverse impacts on the township, and then preservation of environmental features. So those are sort of, you'll see this many times in other land uses that, could be large scale or larger scale, just to make sure that their impact stays consistent with the intent and purpose of design. Any questions on presentations? Okay. You'll see as we go through this, where we had large before, we changed all that to utility scale, just consistency, consistent with the definition. Setbacks, so if we go to page 10, is that where we're at now?
Yep.
Setbacks, so we took your recommendation or your discussion at the last meeting and put in 600 feet. That measures to the fence line, not to the panels themselves. We have the 100 feet for streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, and wetlands. We discussed how common property lines between participating parcels would not have one, would not have a setback. We talk in here about township land coverage. So after Cliff and I had a conversation about zoning in the township and reading through the master plan, we came up with that percentage and figured that was reasonable given the amount of commercially zoned property that you have, given the industrial zone property that you have, and given some of the other uses that currently exist. So we're trying to maintain a balance. And all that was sort of part of our discussion last time. I think we discussed it through some numbers around. So before I move on past page 10, any questions there?
And that 5% refers back to the definition of lot coverage.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, correct.
Kind of carries over to
Yep. So on page 11, this is where your maximum size. So this is something that was added beyond our edits. So this discusses, as I think you had directed, looking at different options for limiting size. So this talks about an 80-acre limit per lot. With a separation distance.
If I'm reading this correctly, you can have separate installations and be considered part of the same unit
Yep.
until you get a mile away, and then you
Correct.
start over.
Yep.
And amalgamate.
Yep. it's under same ownership. So if they're separate, that would not be calculated that way.
Yeah, because it says same property owner, firm or affiliate of the firm that owns or operates.
So let me know if you have questions on this one. I know it's wordy.
No, I can understand. Yeah, it requires a lot of detail.
And the way that it was written, it does give a sort of an example situation to try to better explain what it's intended.
Doesn't it sound like there's any questions from the planning commission?
That's clear.
On to screening, landscaping, and visual impact. So a lot of this is what we discussed last time. The one thing I did have is I talked to our landscape architect and had her go through this a little bit more with me. You know, we started talking about differences in plant types. She's, at least for things like this, she's not a huge advocate of including different tree species, but maybe more or less specifying that, you know, evergreens don't necessarily have to be native, but you know, there are some instances where non-native evergreens might work better in a certain situation than others. Obviously, this would still give the planning commission the ability to work with an applicant on screening types, depending on the location, depending on, you know, the goals or the scenario of a given situation. You know, it's a special use, so you can, of course, have that conversation. We did specify that, you know, it has to be within a certain number of feet of the fencing for screening purposes. And then, what else do we do here? Other than that, I think it's just about the same as it was the last time you saw it. We did make the berm 5 feet in height instead of 3. After talking with her, 5 feet's a better standard, especially since you have fairly large setbacks, so it allows for that 1 to 4 foot slope for soil stabilization and plantings. In smaller circumstances, 5 is pretty large because we're going to try to get that 1 to 4 and eat up quite a bit of property. So we did feel comfortable going to 5 there. Other than that,
Nathan?
yeah.
Do we really want to have deciduous trees? We're going to lose the leaves in the fall, so that everything will be visible then.
Yep, that's a conversation that you can have. So in your existing ordinance, it talks about deciduous trees. You don't have to, and again, I mean, it's gonna have to be screened. So if deciduous trees are added at the baseline, you're still gonna have to have shrubs or evergreens that are screening to the intent of people.
You may have an overstory like the deciduous.
Right. So it would really be more of maybe an accent, make a piece or something like that. You're not gonna screen with those. I mean, you're not gonna screen with a line of maples. I mean, they'll look great in the summer, but yeah, like you said, in the wintertime, you're gonna have to plant shrubs or something like that to create that screening on the lower level. And yeah, it's just an option, and that's why the way the ordinance is written, it can be a combination of any of those options. And again, you as a planning commission have the opportunity to review that and make sure that it meets the intent.
Oh, I see and C. Planning commission may modify required planting separation to determine that the combination of proposed landscaping and screening is sufficient.
Yep. So it allows for, it gives a minimum, but it does allow you to work with an applicant on screening. And again, there may be existing natural vegetation where you're just tucking trees into what might be existing. And maybe a deciduous tree in that instance might be better. So we didn't want to eliminate it as an option.
Oh, especially if it already exists.
We just added titles to the rest of these. You'll see ground cover, security, and fencing, just to identify which section is which. For agricultural protection, we worked with the township attorney on this and modified it a bit. It doesn't require it, but it talks about how utility scale solar energy systems shall generally not be located on or within prime agricultural soils or areas. Last time when we talked to you, there was a provision that excluded them entirely. This is sort of encouraging, the preservation of prime farmland, which again is supported by your master plan. It's something that we talked about previously. So it's something we felt important to include, just so that it is clear that the township has a desire to preserve prime ag land. The rest of these are those sort of best practices that are suggested to an applicant. The planning commission can work with them on trying to. A lot of them are sort of operational in nature, design in nature, where again, making sure there's turnaround radii for large farming equipment, making sure you're not segmenting properties to the extent that they can't be farmed, preservation of soils, maintaining existing topography, etc. We talked about all of that last time.
And way back at the very beginning was the mention of the drain commission. Oh, calling her drain commissioner, water resources commission.
Talking page 13.
Oh, yeah. That 3 on page 13, in my mind, relates to having the water resources.
Yep. Yeah, but we've seen projects come through where the operator, they understood the need or desire to maintain drain tiles, and they've been able to do that successfully in some of the projects we've reviewed. So, and that's something that's recommended in the MSU move on guide. But it also helps with stormwater in the meantime anyway. All right, any questions on that page? Page 14, so again, that prime ag soils area shall be, this was an addition, shall be avoided, not have utility scale systems or components therein unless no other land is reasonably available, and facilities will not adversely affect other areas. So that's sort of, again, suggested. We're looking for you to not place these on prime ag lands, but if it can't be avoided, then it can be considered. Wildlife and environmental protection. So we did add some references in here to impacts on soils that we talked about. And then we also added a provision in here that talks about equipment and materials used in solar energy facilities shall be widely considered safe and non-hazardous by relevant industry standards, applicable guidelines, and or regulatory authority having jurisdiction. So that's where we talked a little bit about materials. And again, being the township, it is best to try to defer to those industry standards, knowing that they are safe, and those regulatory bodies that, at the state and federal level that will be reviewing those. We want to make sure that was included though, because we had that conversation. We felt that was an appropriate way to tackle that. Any questions on that one? Land clearing is unchanged, it's just highlighted. That's something that we added last go around. You see utility scale referenced in here several times. We changed that from large. Going on to page 15. No changes here. These are just highlights. You'll see where the township attorney had a couple of additions here and there. Some wordsmithing, but no real regulatory change on this page from last time. page 16. Similar, we've not made any major changes here. A lot of our highlights were existed in the previous draft. You'll see some wordsmithing that's been done since then. I did have a conversation with the township attorney on some of the discussions we had regarding decommissioning and maintenance. I had my note in the previous draft, but there was some concern about the language. We read through it and thought that it communicated what it needed to communicate. I don't think it's this section, but it's later. But if you still have questions on that, we can discuss it, and I can pull up my notes from last time. I think it had to do more with the transitioning of the bond, so that'll be on page 18. Page 17, emergency personnel. So we did.
Oops.
Now we can see.
Sorry.
You can see it?
I can't see it now.
Can't see. Oh. That's me.
So emergency personnel, this is largely unchanged, but we did add specifically that if specific firefighting chemicals or materials are needed to extinguish solar energy equipment fires, that local emergency services shall be provided with the proper training to handle, contain, and clean up those chemicals. So that was a concern from last time. That would just be part of that again, that training for how to respond to these should they, again, we're dealing with electricity, we're dealing with potential heat. So, but it might not respond well to water. That conversation came up where, are they using other materials? So this would encourage or require that, local emergency personnel would be trained or at least given the information needed to handle that equipment and those chemicals. The rest of this is largely unchanged with the exception of some wordsmithing. Again, changing large to utility scale. On to page 18. Let's see here. So I think in B was where there was a question where the applicant takes up the security and may be assigned to the property owner or system owner / operator with notice to the township. So that's where you might have an applicant come in who is the applicant for the purposes of the project, but maybe selling the system to another operator or to a utility. So it would require that the township be noticed that that has been transferred. And so the attorney was good with the language. I know that was, we had a brief conversation about that, but that was something that he didn't think needed to be changed.
Now, this is interesting, because we had, within A, we had $20 per kilowatt, and now it's changed to equal to $20,000.
Yep, so I will have to, if you have questions on that, that was a township attorney edit. That may be that's the going rate that they're recommending, given what they're seeing.
Okay.
We-
Because 3 years ago, I thought I understood it, and now.
And it changed, so these things change.
Yeah.
So if you have questions on that, that's something that we didn't, we discussed all of these. That was one that we didn't need to discuss in depth. I know they made a change, but why, I'm not entirely sure.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this?
Would that be on a sliding scale depending on the size of the project?
Which is how we originally had it.
Yes.
I think it's page 18 or 19. Okay,
That might need to be
going on.
adjusted.
Let me read those again just to make
so confusing.
So I didn't know if the zeros were just placeholders for nothing.
Yeah, except the 20 is left in and the 40.
Yeah,
And then-
there's a comment for the zeros.
Yeah. Well, can you make a note, Nathan, that to help us understand this better?
Yeah. The change, because I know you were comfortable with the previous language, because you've reviewed that before.
Yeah.
I mean, it still does offer the net salvage value calculated 125%, or, so, that remains unchanged, but the per kilowatt is scalable
Yeah, because it's,
by the size.
it's the or that catches me up, because we want to make sure that there's enough in there for decommissioning.
Right. And it's of the larger of the two.
Oh, oh, is it?
The greater of, yeah.
Oh, it shall be presumed to be the greater of, or. Okay, okay.
Yeah, but why it's not scaled anymore, I don't know.
It looks like it's set to a time inflation,
It is, yeah, but I mean, it's,
but again, it's whichever is greater, and if the 125% is there.
I can discuss this with him, and that's something that we can, it's fairly minor. If it's a direction where you'd like to go back to the way it was, he must not have felt comfortable with the way that was written. But again,
Yeah.
like I said, we focused on a lot of other areas of the ordinance and sort of passed over this when we had a discussion, so.
Yeah, I just remember years ago, it took me a long time to
Yeah,
understand that, and now it's changed.
yeah. Yeah, so I can check back in if that would,
And it's still in there that it's gonna be reevaluated every 5 years during inflation.
Yep. Yep, and that's what we typically recommend. I mean, some will even go less than that and go to 3 years, but.
And the escalation factor shall be included.
Yep.
So, okay.
It may all be covered there. I mean, I'm assuming those edits were made purposefully and delicately, so. But I can still have a conversation with him just to make sure that we're on the same page.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is that it's the lesser amount at the time of construction because all of the materials have a greater salvage value.
Right.
So, but anyway.
Yep. We did add a third-party professional engineer approved by the township. I know there's some concern about, if that was going to be an applicant's engineer or something like that, this would be approved by the
Oh,
township.
where's that? Is that the next
On
one?
page 18.
Oh.
So that's highlighted.
It's
Yep.
oh, thank you.
Yep, so that would, the township would have a say in who would be doing the third-party evaluation. Wordsmithing on the rest of this page, utility scale reference.
Before I go on to number 19,
Yeah.
I have one question on paragraph D, where it says utility scale, go down 2 lines, and it says approval and this ordinance and will, the legality of will or shall.
I think, so that was something that was a Cliff add.
Mhm.
Um,
I think probably is more important to a violation of such a thing.
I mean, will is directive.
Doesn't shall carry more weight though?
I think that would have been on the attorney talking. If you're curious about that, that's something I can bring up.
Maybe if you use shall at the beginning of the sentence, you can't use it again later on.
Yeah, I can have that conversation. That would be helpful.
Oh my gosh. Scratch don't ruin my
Any other questions on this? Okay. 21 here. So, the wordsmithing again, utility scale references, except for down at D, we did add the provision regarding repowering that we had.
Yeah.
So this language was wordsmith, but we borrowed some of it from that guidebook in their model ordinance. So just talk about, that the existing system could be repowered with new panels, unless they're changing the footprint or the panel size, that they wouldn't need to have approval. Subject to likely zoning administration or something like that.
Yeah, they would need to reapply.
So it does enable them to do that. Your attorney added some language regarding liability and sharing that responsibility for complying with the ordinance between property owners, operators, and system owners. Any questions on repowering or that statement? Kind of branching between 19 and 20 there? 20, there is some, again, wordsmithing here. Nothing that really changed any of the regulation of the existing, relatively utility scale, adding numbering. At the bottom of the page, you'll see that we did add, the township attorney included some insurance liability language that we talked about at the last meeting. I did talk to him about your concerns there, so this was added. And then also, if it's requested by the township, that they have to provide it within 30 days. And that the insurance will have to be adjusted every 5 years in accordance with reevaluating the cost of decommissioning. So those are all lined up together. And those are all of the changes. Just any discussion, questions on any of this, anything that we missed, anything that we missed to mark on from our conversations the last couple of meetings?
Good job.
Hopefully I know we got it, we're hoping to get a little bit more time to read it, so hopefully you have a good weekend.
Well, you did hit on the changes we asked for, so. We should be pleased with that.
Yes. Yeah, we try to hit on everything, like I said, some of these conversations take a bit of time, regarding where we can, hit the mark with what you're looking for, and, what makes sense in your ordinance, given your existing standards and provisions, definitions.
Oh. The whole bit about studies.
Yeah,
that I
would be
went over that.
in, the environmental studies section. Page 14.
Sorry if I'm making your notes, Okay, there it is. Planning commission may require the applicant to submit reports. Okay, so I was thinking we had something about, the applicant would pay for studies to be done, and the township would need to agree to do the study. So by putting in United States Federal Wildlife Service, is that the way to address that concern?
So in this case, your escrow policy in the ordinance already requires an applicant to submit escrow, and those fees would be paid towards the escrow. So we did look at that. We gave the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as an example because for an endangered species, there's a tool that's commonly used that identifies them on a property and signals whether or not there needs to be further study. So that's sort of the first, and then the first question. That's sort of an example. We could put in examples of other, the planning commission may require the applicant to submit reports from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We could say from, an environmental impact statement or assessment. We could say that you want, wetland delineation, which may already be required, or would be required anyway because they would need to show the setbacks from those wetlands. So that would already be, need to be something that's submitted in order to determine compliance with that standard. But this allows you to, or it enables the planning commission to consider, impacts on animal movement for endangered species, impacts on protected wetlands, impacts on soils, stormwater water runoff, and tell the applicant that you need to prove that you're not going to have an impact on X, Y, Z. And we want this study, this study, this study. We could list, I gave an example of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, just as an example. We don't necessarily need to list any possible or potential study that you could want. But again, in order to ensure compliance with the ordinance, you can certainly ask the applicant to provide information. Because if you're evaluating the application and you need more information in order to determine whether or not that standard is met, you can ask them for more info.
And in a special land use,
Yep.
we can, the planning commission can put further conditions on
Correct.
the granting.
Yep. So while it's good to make sure that your standards, especially for bigger projects, or projects that might have bigger impact, it's important to have standards that are comprehensive and cover a lot of items, but you don't because it's a special use. You don't need to cover everything under the sun because you will, if say you have an application come in and there's a certain maybe there's a creek or a large stand of trees on the property or something like that. They're going to have to go through and prove that they're not making impacts on certain bat species. Trees are going to have to be felled between certain months of the year. All that will be outlined, and you'll figure all that out through the recommendations of U.S. Fish and Wildlife or other sources. So if you don't get that information, you can ask for it.
We might have slid by it, and I didn't see it, but is there a paragraph in here that did see that said that once the application has been approved and you're in process, now we're going to have, over the course of time, periodic inspections, periodic training of the fire department and all that. That's going to come on an escrow account?
So in the
Did I miss that somewhere?
inspections in here, so your initial escrow application, your application escrow would be different than the applicant paying for these other things that are sort of ongoing. So in here it states that the applicant shall provide it.
Page, please.
On page 17. So local emergency service and fire department training or materials will be held or provided thereafter at the expense of the owner and or operator as requested by the
Thank you.
emergency. Yep. And then inspections, I believe there is reference to the operator paying for that as well.
Yeah, in the second sentence.
can't remember where that, which page?
It's number 23 on that same page.
Yep.
Okay, thank
Township
you.
Empire.
Thank you.
Yep, so how that's handled, that could be something that you work out with them as part of the approval. Maybe there's an ongoing inspection escrow. You'll see that sometimes with gravel pits.
Mhm.
There's an annual inspection, and they have an escrow account set up for payment of those services. To have an engineer or somebody go out and take a look at it. So that can be something that's set up as part of this monthly use process. You sort of negotiate it as a, okay, we need to inspect this to meet this standard, how are we doing it?
Well, any further questions for Nathan?
Comfortable with the way things are written and the extent? And I know that there's encouragement to try to set a public hearing as soon as possible next month. Maybe a regularly scheduled special meeting depending on availability. Depends on how comfortable you all are, if you want to have another meeting. After I get a couple, we have a couple of minor questions here, but we don't have any really large changes.
Yeah.
You can sit down for a few more weeks. We don't need as much time, so if you want to have another meeting, we could. But if you feel comfortable moving forward, it's up to you.
I'm comfortable moving forward. I'm seeing some nodding.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah, I would move that we discuss and vote on this tomorrow night to move forward.
Julie, did you catch that motion?
Yes, I'll support.
Yeah, I may be able to get an answer on a couple of these things by tomorrow, the couple of questions we have, because they are brief.
Yeah, that placeholder.
Yep.
That would be helpful. Okay. All right, any further discussion on?
We have a motion for a vote.
Yep, we have a motion for a vote. Julie, can you read it?
I've got Harris moved to discuss and vote on this tomorrow
Regular reading.
at the regular meeting from 3:21.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. All righty, we will discuss setting a public hearing and going forward. Tomorrow. At our regularly scheduled. And you're welcome to stick around for a while. We won't set up another meeting with you right now, but I'm sure we'll be meeting with you again in the near future. We have more work to do on the master plan and the entire zoning ordinance
Yep.
as such, so.
Sounds good. Let me know. And
Yeah, for sure. Okay, all righty, and we'll let you know when the public hearing is if you want to attend that.
If you need me to be there, let me know,
Yeah.
and I will let you know what my availability is.
Yep.
So I can't entice you with coffee and cookies or anything?
I mean, it's nice. Definitely not everyone does that, so.
Really?
Sometimes cookies, but not usually coffee, so.
Well, you just gotta come to the country more often. Okay.
I have one question for you, but I'd like to take it in the other room.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, you're in trouble.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good thought.
Okay, public comment. Thank you for your patience.
The first person that signed up is Paul Schroeder.
Hey, he had to go somewhere else.
Paul left.
John Deegan.
I'm John Deegan, 1840 Minor Park Road. I am in favor of solar for one. I do not think, someday I think the way the planning commission is going, I'm going to have to ask permission to grow certain crops. You've already tried to limit me down to the amount. You've spent tremendous amount of money on this project. It was already, or this ordinance already was in place before, and some of you people even voted in favor of that ordinance. And I would think that I would consider you to, would like you to all step down from your positions if you can't live up to your past ones. So I would ask you to resign, and the lawyer who gives you a lot of misinformation that you're taking in, and the money you wasted for that gentleman there was all money not well spent as far as being a taxpayer. I don't approve of all that stuff. So that's about all I got.
And Roy Burkholder.
I'm at 9120 Trails End, not too far from you.
Good.
I'm still trying to catch up with some of the pages. So I saw the original was a half-page ordinance, and then it was 6 pages. And the current ordinance for a utility scale project on an ag, is there any limit on lot coverage? At one time it was like 20%. Okay. So my concerns had to do with the runoff and erosion, the topsoil disturbance, compaction during the process, and then the wildlife impact. And I think when they took that 20% coverage off, the solar panels cannot absorb any water. It's just like the shed of a roof placed close together. And so these things that are all aligned, they tilt, yes, but they'll be like a little river at the bottom of them. And so I think if you don't limit the coverage, again, the ground can't soak the water evenly like it could before. And so you're just putting a lot of impervious surfaces there. The other thing about the topsoil, I wish it would limit so you couldn't grade the topsoil, because when you move the topsoil, even when they did the Pearson Dam, they intended good, but when you get a big rainstorm, all the work that the bulldozers does gets pushed down. And so with the Pearson swamp drainage and everything else, there's been a lot of money invested to try and keep down erosion. And then when they build this thing, I think they say, oh, it can be turned back into farmland. And I understand. I grew up on an 80-acre farm. I went to Purdue and got an ag engineering degree because 80-acre farm could not support my family and my parents too. Yeah, so I understand it's tough. But when that equipment, they pile it in and everything else, they're going to pack that soil down. You know, if they want to do the compaction study before and after, I think they would have a hard time turning it back into farmland at the end of the time. And then last but not least, on the wildlife impact, I already be careful about the deer, and I can just imagine having this perimeter fence that's going to channel all the deer along the roads, and they're going to try and jump across it, so they're going to cross it. And so anything from that, or people side, the Audubon Society says solar panels are good. If you read the article, it's good with the exception of lake shore birds. They see those panels and they call it lake effect. They think it's a big blue water. They try and land and they can't take off because they need to run. So we got sandhill cranes, we got turkeys. Just don't underestimate the impact of that.
That's the only person that's on the list.
Julie O'Reilly.
Okay, just a second, please. And who was asking? Melissa? Okay.
7540 renovation. Hopefully I can get this in under the 3 minutes. So White River Township is not only a special place to live, it's a destination. How many rural communities can say that they are bordered by Lake Michigan and scores of beachfront homes and vacation homes? They have a lakeside restaurant that's over 90 years old and a popular golf course that draws people from all over. This is not to mention the beautiful rolling hills with fields of crops, numerous trees, and wide open spaces where people watch the sun go down every night. The Township Board and Planning Committee are charged with upholding our master plan. It's clear, noting that maintaining patterns of development that accommodate, enhance, and preserve the township's historical setting, rural amenities, open spaces, and scenic beauty is our main goal in image and community character. Even though and I believe I saw this correctly, it was hard to see, the proposed percentage of total land mass used for utility scale solar in the township is 5%. This is still 500 acres. This is far too large not to decimate our township land mass. Montague's is 170 acres, and look at what that has already done. 500 acres, although this is much more of a possibility to fit within the township, it still is not an integration. It is still a decimation of a large percentage of land. It was mentioned in our last meeting, at our board meeting, that Consumers Power, and I sent you all the link, has noted they need less than 2% of farmland statewide in order to meet their renewable energy goals. It's also been calculated to power our township, it would take 60 acres. To use 2% of farmland would be 80. Why are we looking at a solar array of 500 acres when we would be contributing to renewable energy, contributing to consumer energy's goals and what they need to attain with just 80 acres? Instead, why are we going to 500? I don't understand the reasoning behind that, and also I think this gentleman brought up back here, there also needs to be a minimum on parcels. Otherwise, we could end up with a 20-acre parcel here, and a 40 here, and a 50 here, and all over the place, piecemeal, and so I really think we need that guidance. It's great to see the 600-foot setbacks, but in the end, you all are you're responsible for holding up that master plan, and we really appreciate you doing that. I don't think our master plan includes a 500-acre solar array. Thank you, and thanks for all your work today. Look forward to the next update. Thank you.
Okay, Lauren
Lauren
Martinez.
101 Pizza. I really appreciated seeing that on board. It sounded like you guys worked all weekend, so reading this, so thank you for that. But when would this be available so that we could read it? Because I couldn't read that good, it was really small.
It will, we are likely to have it, well, we have to publish a public hearing, okay? And we have to approve it, so tomorrow night we will be discussing it further. It isn't complete yet till we get a couple of things put in there. So when we do announce the public hearing on the website, we'll be putting the proposed amendment on the website. We're hoping to have a public hearing in April, so it will be sometime soon.
Between that. Okay, and just adding to Melissa's said, I think generally is too broad of a term. It could go a lot of directions. Okay, and time we should be more clear on that. And I've been looking at some other ordinances, and several that I looked at have minimum of 20-acre lots, so that it's not a couple here and a few there and all spread out, minimizing the impact of the residents. Thank you.
Should we have one back?
Okay, just a second.
Sure.
So, and go ahead.
I'm Pamela Balcom from 10-521 Old Highway 99. There were two things that I wanted to say. Number one is that I believe that Paul Schrader was right when he said he was gonna go ultimately to as many acres as possible. He thought we should just, do it all. So I'm not agreeing with him, I'm agreeing with his passion. My passion is that we take that 600 and we absolutely slam 1,000 acres, 1,000-foot setbacks, so that we are even more strong about the small guys like me, who only have 2 acres, but would be surrounded by these solar energy power. The other thing is that I believe that in order to make a fire that breaks out go away, you have to blanket it with something that I don't understand because I'm not a firefighter, but according to what I have researched, they do not have the equipment for that locally. And so that's huge when you get somebody who's like 600 feet away from something that breaks out. That can easily spread to trees and then land, and it's a factor. So we need to really be sure. Also, there's never enough in escrow. There's never enough. So money might look good today, but look at where we are economically as a nation. What bought $50 worth of groceries 10 years ago doesn't buy a bag of it. So we need to be aware of that as well. Escrow is going to look like nothing when we're done with this. So that's all I've got. God bless you.
Anybody else? Yes?
Lucinda, Lucy Grover, Gero Yard. And I'm at 6676 Fruitvale Road, right around the corner. And I just want to say that I would agree with Melissa, 500 acres, while that's a compromise, it is still an awful lot of land. And it's already been talked about the impact of the equipment to make this possible is going to devastate the soil and devastate the farmland. Whatever is left, especially when you scrape off the topsoil, as they're suggesting that we do, in 20 years, 25 years, there isn't going to be anything really left there. And the rain, the water runoff, the rivulets, that's not, it's going to permanently alter the soil structure, having this kind of uneven irrigation and having this ground covered by these metal platforms. And we're not going to get anything back. We're not going to get the land back. As far as saving the land, preserving the land, farmers want to let their land rest. Land doesn't rest, it constantly rejuvenates. There's other ways to tackle allowing land to rest, if that's part of the argument. I just think that it's going to be very devastating. We need to back it down even more and listen to the statistics of what Consumer Powers needs and parcel statistics. There's been a lot of debate and it's been a really good discussion. And I just look forward to being privy to more discussions, and I hope that we can bring it back even further. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes?
Mary Jo Ernst, my dad and I are residents of White River Township. I just want to say that I agree with everything that Melissa was saying about the size. It's a start of a compromise, but I think it still is too large for our half-sized township. Mind you, it's twice the size of ours, and I still think 500 acres is way too big for our 10,000-acre township. And I think that consumers knows what they're doing. And, they have some pretty accurate data on their site. I think the article, consumer site was sent to all of you. If not, I'm sure they can send you the link. And I think 2% is a good number to go with. I think 5% is too big, and I think they're the experts. I'm not an expert, but they're the expert. And if they say that 2% is what is needed, I think that that's what needs to be looked at.
Anybody else?
Okay, thank you. We're going to get together tomorrow night, 6:30.
I move that we adjourn.
I would second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, we adjourn, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.